institution. People listened, and it's often very unnerving. But by this stage, Joe Mulhern was very familiar with the rebel song tradition. His mother sang lots of it at home, he told me. But in the 1960s folk clubs in Belfast, he says there were 6 of them at the time, he had the anti-establishment American songs of Woody Guthrie and the radical social critique of Scottish songwriter and playwright Ewan MacColl. He got involved in street politics, the C&D movement, the anti-nuclear movement, the anti-Vietnam War movement. He started his own folk club. Lots of American songs were sung in the folk clubs, and very little Irish material. He started to write songs himself in 1968 and 69, but only lyrics and not melodies. A lot of his early songs were set to Ewan MacColl and Woody Guthrie tunes until he discovered what he calls his own Irish tunes. He said his motive was simple. Our side of the story was not being told. He wrote what he called agitprop songs, mostly about local events like police brutality and jailbreaks. Later he would write songs about Bloody Sunday and other political flashpoints. Some of his songs celebrated heroic deeds and street battles. Others described atrocities in the style of the old broadside writers of the 19th century. But these songs, and the songs written by his contemporaries, represented a very important change in Irish political song, from inclusively Republican to pointedly sectarian. And I asked Joe about this, and he said that he and other songwriters were forced into a sectarian position because it was the corrupt Protestant Unionist state, in his opinion, that was being explicitly attacked in the songs. And the legal forces that sustained that state, particularly the police specials and the Royal Ulster Constabulary, as well as all the politicians who supported their brutal actions during the legitimate dissent by the oppressed in protest marches and demonstrations, were the enemy. And I'll give you an example of the kind of songs. The Battle of the Bogside. The Bogside man is the man for me. He's got the recruiting in the RUC. You are the Bogside man. Steady in your aim with the petrol bomb. Don't throw it on the healers come. You are the Bogside man. And another song, maybe not as graphic, was Belfast Town. And for the first time I ever met Joe Mulhern, I recorded that song back in the 70s, the last record I made before I came to America. And I met Joe Mulhern for the first time about 15 years afterwards in a pub called the Dunroe Bar in Derry. You can hardly see the outside wall. I believe you put that down with the smoke. And this smallish man came darting through the smoke at me and grabbed me by the belt and said, "You owe me royalties, you bastard." He said. and that's when I first met Joe Mulhern. But luckily he was only joking. The song was Belfast is a city where decent men are few, where guns and drums have mesmerized the working man, it's true, where democracy means hypocrisy and corruption does abound. And I'm telling you, John, I've oft times longed to leave out Belfast town. For long we've been exploited, and oft times I've asked why that men without compunction were allowed to bleed us dry. In many a filthy tenement and buildings falling down. And I tell you, John, I've oft times longed to leave out Belfast town. Lots of other verses too, and I love that song, and it was a very penetrating commentary on working class conditions on both sides, I suppose you could say, of the cultural divide in the Belfast of the 1960s and 70s. The most celebrated song from this era, the early 1970s, is without doubt The Men Behind the Wire, and it was written by a man called Pat McGuigan, songwriter, and I don't know if I have a copy of it here. Yeah, The Men Behind the Wire. It was an internment without trial, which was one of the most, I suppose you'd have to use the word stupid things that the British government ever did, interning people, mostly from the nationalist community, almost exclusively, without trial. Pat McGuigan's internment, his internment papers listed his occupation as songwriter. He didn't have them any other reason. He wrote the song The Men Behind the Wire, and there's a clear movement in the song away from issues of civil rights, with paradoxically a implied sectarianism to a nationalist focus again, as the primary enemy once more becomes the British Army and the British government. Not for them a judge and jury, nor indeed a crime at all. Being Irish means we're guilty, so we're guilty one and all. Round the world the truth will echo, Cromwell's men are here again. England is once more dishonoured in the eyes of honest men. And this song had a meteoric rise. It went to number 1 in the Irish charts, despite being banned on every official radio station. This was the era of pirate radio stations. And the song had an explosive effect all over the country and brought people into the Republican and the nationalist movement who perhaps wouldn't have been brought in without the song. After Bloody Sunday, the popularity of national song intensified and grew stronger again when the hunger strikes were centre stage in the Western world. And O'Hara Hughes Macreation Sands is a song written by Seamus McMahon, a songwriter from Dublin, and it's a song I recorded again myself. It's another national song without any overt suggestion of sectarianism, yet it's unequivocally anti-British. Nevertheless, the perception on the Union side would of course be that it was sectarian. For 80 days these men did lay under Margaret Thatcher's tyranny, till British churchmen came to say that no clergymen their souls would free. But far and wide with tears and pride their story was told in distant lands. So your voices raise, and we sing in praise of O'Hara Hughes Macreation Sands. Joe, he stopped writing songs altogether during what he called those long, bitter years of sectarianism after Bloody Sunday polarised the struggle between Republicans and the Unionist state and the British Army. And he stopped mainly, and this is his quote, because he was not particularly a Provo supporter. And he says again, there wasn't much good to sing about in those years. In retrospect, he feels the songs had a big impact at the start, but only up to Bloody Sunday. There were other factors at work as well, and a lot of that was mostly changing musical tastes. Whereas there was an active live performing scene for groups who sang rebel songs at that time, particularly in pubs in Derry and Belfast, mostly in the style that was invented here in New York by the Clancy Brothers, a very hybrid style. And also bars in smaller towns that all disappeared in the 70s, and those folk bands along with their songs disappeared. And it was about that time in the early 1980s another voice emerged in Northern Ireland, a new genre of songs dedicated to reconciliation. Once again, the impetus came from outside Ireland. One of the prime writers in this movement has been singer, broadcaster, storyteller and songwriter Tommy Sands from Westford, County Down, who was actually speaking on this topic here a few months ago. Tommy started to write songs of peace and reconciliation in the early 1980s, and I asked him how that happened, and he said that he became increasingly uncomfortable with singing rebel songs. I'll quote from some of the interview. He said he was singing rebel songs in the 60s because they were, and this is quote, far enough away. It would be normal because coming from a nationalist Catholic background, they were the songs that we would have identified with very much. Those songs were being handed down and sung in the house. The Protestant neighbours would have had no problems then with those songs at all. At that time they were far enough away both in terms of geography and in years. Songs like The Wearing of the Green would have been sung by both communities. Also even songs about 1916 like The Foggy Jew, that would have been no problem. In fact, some of the groups at the time who sang these songs, groups like the Glen Folk Four, they would have been Protestants and they would have all been singing rebel songs. They wouldn't have thought too deeply about it. There was a sense of being a rebel in most young people anyway. And again these words. When the civil rights movement began and then shortly afterwards, when internment began, we were singing a lot of songs at concerts which were organised to raise money for the dependents of the people who were imprisoned without trial. This movement would have set out to bring in to the audiences both Protestants and Catholics. Then, rebel songs were too close to home. They were associated with policemen getting shot, Protestant neighbours being shot. So I didn't want to do a concert where I would be throwing up walls against people. At that time, rebel songs became anathema to Protestants. My own idea about songs were songs about uniting working class people. That's very much what I was involved in those days. Songs that would drive a wedge between people, I wouldn't touch them, and rebel songs were doing that. And then they went along, the Sands family, to Eastern Europe, and they met a lot of the canción singers from South and Central America, people like into Illimani, and he became a big fan of Victor Hara and Ernesto Cardenal, and he started, influenced by these people, to write songs about the horrors of war, shared by both communities. His most famous song is There Were Roses and Rugby Lips. It's a long song with other time to play about sectarian murders, tit-for-tat revenge killings, which became very part, unfortunately, part of the fabric of life in his own community in the 1970s and 80s. Then he wrote a song called IRA and UBF, where he drew parallels between the experiences of both communities, particularly in working class areas where there was a common economic oppressor. And then he started to reach out and globalize his perspectives. And I don't stop with you there. Daughters and Sons, just a verse of it. It's one of Tommy's most famous songs, where he globalizes the Irish struggle. From the town.